Greetings, everybody. Welcome to your video series on an introduction to sociology. Today's topic, class consciousness, false consciousness, and collective conscience. Let's get started. So what exactly is the difference between conscience and consciousness? We're going to think of conscience as the moral understanding of the difference between right and wrong, whereas consciousness suggests an awareness in our own minds of what's happening in society and what's happening around us. So again, conscience, what's the difference between right and wrong? Consciousness, an awareness of what's happening in our society. So let's start with the concept of class consciousness. This was developed by Karl Marx, who, if you remember from chapter 1, developed the conflict theory, where he saw society as a battleground of groups of people competing for power and resources. Again, Marx was writing during the Industrial Revolution when he saw a big divide happening between the factory workers and the factory owners. So he devised this idea of class consciousness as the awareness that someone would have of their rank in society. In other words, are they at the top with a lot of power, prestige, opportunity, resources, or are they at the bottom with very little power, prestige, resources, and opportunity? The more aware you were, he believed, of where exactly you stack up in society based on the kind of work you were doing, and in his case, then he called that class consciousness. The opposite of class consciousness, according to Marx, was false consciousness. He said that false consciousness is a condition in which a person's beliefs and ideals are not necessarily in their own best interest. He saw that some people, especially again during the Industrial Revolution, did not quite understand the dynamics of what was happening as cultures moved from agriculture to industrial. And he thought that there were some people who did not quite understand how they were being taken advantage of, how their labor and how their work was being exploited by factory owners for profit and for their own benefit at the expense of the safety of the workers, their well-being, their health care, for example. And if people didn't quite understand that dynamic and the reality of that dynamic, then Karl Marx said that person had a false consciousness. They were not quite aware enough of what was happening in their society, and as a result, they were likely to experience difficulties and problems and not be able to take care of themselves in the way that people need to. So the difference between false and class consciousness is the idea that class consciousness, the lights are on upstairs, right? You are aware, you have an understanding of what's going on, you understand where you rank in society, who has power over you, where you are powerless. False consciousness, the lights are off. That awareness of where you rank and who has power over you and what the consequences of that powerlessness are, he said if you were not aware of that, then you had a false consciousness. Now, what do we mean by collective conscience? Again, conscience being the difference between right and wrong, this moral understanding. Collective conscience was developed by Emile Durkheim. Again, if you remember from chapter 1, he developed structural functionalist perspective. He saw things from a very macro perspective. He believed that society was the structure made up of interconnecting parts where each part served a purpose. And one of the biggest things that Durkheim noted at the time was this idea of collective conscience, where people in a society seemed to have this agreed upon understanding of a certain set of beliefs, morals, and attitudes that allowed society to run smoothly without a lot of problems. And he believed, if you remember from a previous video, that if the society lost that sense of collective conscience, then we would move into a state of anomie or chaos or normlessness, where people were struggling to try to figure out what is going on in the world, what's going on in our society, how am I supposed to behave, where do I fit? Durkheim goes on to say, if I do not submit to the conventions of society, in other words, the collective conscience, if in my dress I do not conform to the customs observed in my country and in my social class, he says, the ridicule I provoke, the social isolation in which I am kept, produce the same effects as punishment. Durkheim believed that if people violated the collective conscience, if they went against the societal norms and values and beliefs and morals of the time, that there would be some form of punishment, even if that punishment was ridicule, being made fun of, isolated, being shunned. He pointed this out as a way of helping us to understand how strong and important this sense of collective conscience is. You either get on board with it and you have a smooth existence, or if you challenge it in some way, you can expect that there are going to be problems. Now, let's think about some examples today. Harry Styles. Anybody a Harry Styles fan? You know, he turns our understanding of gender, for example, upside down. Gender has its own collective conscience, doesn't it? There are ways that we as a society expect men and women to behave. There are ways we expect men and women to dress. And Harry Styles kind of came along and thumbed his nose at these mores and expectations. And he has his own way of dressing and behaving and flaunting the rules of masculinity that have been very successful for him. Of course, he is Harry Styles, right? If the average Joe were to come to work dressed in these outfits or walk down the street in these outfits, Emile Durkheim again would say, the ridicule I provoke produces the same effects as punishment. In other words, if just an average guy were to walk down the street or come to work or come to class, or if your teacher came to class dressed like this, there would probably be some snickering, some making fun of, some labeling. And that's our way of letting this person know, hey, you are violating the collective conscience and we don't like it. So take this off, put on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, and make us all feel more comfortable. That's going to do it for now. Thanks for checking in. Never stop learning, and remember, sociology is everywhere.